Hello, and welcome to the first episode of me talking about my feelings on the One Piece anime adaptation all the way up to Whole Cake Island, because Wano's not done yet, so I'm going to wait until Wano is done. For starters, let's talk about the chapter reviews. So I've discontinued the chapter reviews because they were just very, very exhausting. I'm busy, so I don't always have time to make them. And I felt like I was not saying a lot of interesting things. I felt like I was just literally describing what was happening in chapter. So I'm not going to continue chapter reviews, but I will keep making some One Piece content on this channel, starting with this video right here, which will cover the Shell's Town arc, which covers Luffy's backstory all the way up to meeting Zoro. Let's start with a bit of a critique I have of the anime, which is that they rearranged Luffy's backstory in the Shell's Town arc, because Luffy's backstory doesn't happen until after he meets Zoro, and I don't quite like that decision. I don't think it's a bad decision, because I think a bad decision would be cutting it out of the story, but I think it should have happened as the first episode, and I'm going to explain why right now. I'm a big fan of someone called Film Crit Hulk. He has a YouTube channel, but he also does a lot of writing on his Patreon, and he talks about something called interiority. So interiority is basically about understanding how a character thinks and functions, understanding why a character wants what they want and why they are motivated to do the things that they do. So with One Piece, in the manga, we start with Luffy's backstory, and what that does is it establishes interiority for Luffy, because we understand what Luffy wants and why he wants it. That Luffy wants to go out to sea and be a pirate because he wants to prove himself as a man. He wants to be a great man like he views Shanks is. Shanks is a pirate, he goes out to sea, he goes on all these adventures, he's free, and Luffy wants to be that. But at this point in the story, he has a very shallow idea of what it means to be a man, a pirate, and a great person. But he comes to have a more nuanced view when Shanks fights with the mountain bandits, which is an important contrast in masculinity. I also did a video talking about this on my main channel, which covers chapter 1. It's just really, really good. I drew every single frame. It's super beautiful. You should definitely go check it out. Basically, the mountain bandit is someone who just goes around acting like he's the toughest thing in the world and making fun of Shanks, and Shanks doesn't hit him. And so it makes Luffy think that he's a coward. But what Shanks teaches Luffy is that, you know, a man is not someone who just picks pointless fights. He's not someone who just shows off and does shallow things. A man has restraint, a man cares about protecting his friends, and a man is an empathetic and caring person. And I think that that's a really good nuanced view of what it means to be a man in One Piece. Of course, that idea is going to get further explored, but it's a good starting point right here. So we understand what Luffy wants. Luffy wants to prove himself as a man to Shanks, the person he most admires, and he's going to do that by emulating the kinds of things that Shanks does, and Shanks' very nuanced way of being a pirate and a man. So now we're moving on to Koby and Alvida, which is a very short story, but it's gonna flow into Shell's Town. So with Koby and Alvida, it's pretty straightforward. Of Luffy just shows up on the ship, he tells Koby that he is someone willing to die for his dreams, and it establishes the theme for this episode, which is having the courage to fight for your dreams, even if there's a chance you might fail, or in this extreme case, you might die. Because if you fail because you tried, at least you tried, but if you failed because you never tried, then you're gonna regret it forever. So Koby stands up to Alvida and Luffy saves him. But what I love is that Koby actually stays with Luffy on his adventure, and Koby is an important role in the Shell's Town arc, because Koby wants to be a Marine, because he wants to find and beat up bad guys like a good hero is supposed to do, like a good Marine. But when we get to this island, it turns out the Marines are pretty much no different than pirates, and it causes Koby to have a more nuanced view of what it actually means to be a Marine and what it actually means to have this title. So Morgan has the exact same personality as Alvida, and that is a very smart decision. So Alvida is a typical bad guy. She's a typical pirate. She uses force and death threats to make people worship her. She is an absolute tyrant. And Morgan is literally exactly the same. He is someone who uses violence and death threats and intimidation to make everyone worship him. He's gonna have a statue. He threatens people with murder if they don't do what he wants. He is an absolute menace. So it shows that even though he is a Marine and Alvida is a pirate, they are basically the same thing. And I think what's important about establishing these nuances in the very first arc of One Piece is because in real life, pirates are criminals. So in Oda's story, he needs to establish that there is nuance in this situation, that in his world, a pirate is not someone who is exclusively a ruthless criminal, but a pirate is someone who is free to decide good and evil for themselves. So this arc is less about the idea of pirates are good and Marines are bad. It's more so that corruption exists no matter what group you're a part of, and it's not about the label you wear. It is about your actions as a person that define who you are. That establishes that labels don't matter in this world, that Marine and pirate, there's basically no difference. What makes you who you are is your actions, and ultimately, a pirate is someone who is free to decide good and evil for themselves. And I think that that is a really good way to establish a nuanced idea of something in the real world that's maybe a little more black and white. I'm gonna get into Zoro now. Zoro has a little backstory, which is very quick, but it establishes that One Piece is going to be a story with like these little tragic backstories. Kobe's backstory was basically that, oh, I got on a ship and it was a pirate ship and I've been stuck here. And that was pretty much all of it. Like, it wasn't super dramatic. It was an accident and it happened. And Luffy's backstory is not really tragic. Like, sure, Shanks lost his arm, but it was more so that Shanks was a hero who gave up something important for Luffy, and that Luffy, you know, values this. But with Zoro, we get the first like tragic backstory. And what's great is it establishes interiority in a sort of dramatic way, where we understand that Zoro had his friend. She died, and now he's carrying the dream of becoming the world's greatest swordsman for both of them. It establishes what Zoro wants. If Zoro's gonna be part of the crew, if he's gonna be a main character, we have to understand what motivates him. The anime handled the material in some ways better than the manga, but in a lot of ways worse. But the one thing I do like is that they extended Zoro's backstory a bit with Kuina, and it made Kuina feel a little bit more like an actual friend to Zoro, because we see Zoro show up at the dojo for the first time, and he started off as like a total noob. He grabbed like 1,000,000 swords, which shows he clearly has no experience with swords, and got his ass beat. But he spent time training to the point where he could defeat adults, and yet he couldn't beat Kuina. She was a genuinely worthy rival to him, and never being able to settle that score with her is something that has haunted him forever. So establishes a really good and strong character motivation why Zoro feels he has to train as hard as he can, because he has to prove to himself that he can become the world's greatest swordsman. It's a good character motivation. It's not super dramatic in the manga, it's a little bit better in the anime, but what's important is not about whether or not you feel the same sense of loss that Zoro feels. What's important is that you establish what these characters are motivated by, so that when they make choices later in the story, you understand where they're coming from. So the Shellstown arc is good. My favorite episode in the Shellstown arc is Luffy's backstory, which also in the anime, they cut it short. It ends with Shanks giving Luffy the hat, and we don't even get to see Luffy punch the Sea King. I don't think that even happens until like episode 500, where Luffy has like a second backstory, but I don't want to spoil it too much for people who haven't caught up to that material. If you've never caught up to One Piece, it starts off very good. It establishes some interesting ideas, even if they're pretty straightforward. But One Piece is good, and I will see you again, maybe tomorrow, maybe a couple days later, with the Orangetown arc, where we talk about Nami and Buggy.